Now to another issue that may well wind up before the U.S. Supreme Court one day. The state of Texas last week approved a mandatory reading list for public school students that includes passages from the Bible. Texas is the nation's second most populous state and educates 1 in 10 of America's public school students. Last year, Texas also required teachers to display the 10 Commandments in their classrooms. Supporters of the new curriculum say it reflects religious traditions that were fundamental to America's founding. The Bible stories on the Texas mandatory reading list include Old Testament classics like Jonah and the Whale, David and Goliath, and Daniel in the Lion's Den, as well as excerpts from Exodus, such as Moses and the burning bush, and the story of Adam and Eve from the book of Genesis. But many people are criticizing the Texas Board of Education's policy decision. A spokesperson for the Progressive Texas Freedom Network told the Associated Press kids of all faith backgrounds and no faith are served by Texas schools, and they should all feel welcome in Texas schools. But this is sending the message to children that one and only one religious text, a Christian one, is worthy of making this required reading list. And to talk more about the Texas curriculum changes, I'm joined by two distinguished guests now. Daniel Bach is a research fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Diane Ravitch is a former education professor at New York University. Daniel supports the decision and Diane opposes it. Welcome to the day to both of you. It's great to have you on the show. I want to start with a fairly simple question to both of you. Why is this the right or wrong move? Let's start with you, Daniel.
I think this is the right move simply because to read in English, to understand the English language, you have to know many of these stories from the Bible. Yes, there are complaints that this curriculum is Bible infused, but so is the English language. The story of Adam and Eve, the concepts of sin, the Good Samaritan, the prodigal son. If you don't know these allusions, you're not going to understand many of the foundational texts that we're going to read elsewhere in the curriculum. You're not going to understand many op-eds or columns. You're not going to understand a lot of spoken English if you're not familiar with these stories. I liken it to a Jenga tower, the children's game, where your ability to understand the language requires many of these bits of knowledge. And if you pull one too many out, the whole thing collapses and you're not going to be able to really converse in an intelligent way, let alone understand even a basic passage that you're going to, be presented and have to read.
Diane, how do you see it?
The Texas State Board of Education is the board whose majority are evangelical Christian zealots. This is why they've posted the 10 Commandments in every classroom and why they're requiring Bible reading. They really have very little interest in the kinds of things that Daniel believes in, which I believe in too. I believe in having biblical literacy, but this is not about biblical literacy. This is about having children who are Catholic read from a Protestant Bible. This is about having children who are Hindu, or Buddhist, or Jewish, or atheists required to read the Protestant Bible. And it is a violation of the Constitution. The words separation of church and state do not appear in the Constitution, but neither does the word God. The Constitution says that the state should not endorse any religion and that students should have, that everyone should have religious freedom. So I believe those children who are required to read a Bible that is not of their own faith are being indoctrinated, and I think it's wrong.
Daniel, opponents like Diane say this violates the separation of church and state, which is mandated by the First Amendment. How do you reconcile this mandatory reading list in Texas with the First Amendment, which starts with, I'm going to quote that quickly, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. That's considered the Establishment Clause, prohibiting the government from creating a state-sponsored religion or endorsing one specific religion. How do you reconcile these two?
Well, I think we teach the stories of Achilles and Zeus. We teach Greek mythology, but we're not then promoting Greek mythology as the one worldview that we expect students to adopt. Same thing here. As I was saying, many of these biblical stories are foundations of any education, just as basic mathematics, germ theory, Shakespeare, Achilles and Zeus, the stories of Troy and Odysseus, right? We can teach the stories from the Bible as literature or in important myths, without necessarily saying that this is what students absolutely have to believe. When I was a teacher, there were books that I would read to my students that made allusions to the creation story or to other elements of the Bible, and I would give a brief explanation of where this allusion came from, so the students could understand it and comprehend it. But I wasn't teaching it as truth, even though I myself am a Christian. I was teaching it as literature. I was teaching it as something that they had to understand, so then they could understand Shakespeare or To Kill a Mockingbird or any other story that I was teaching in my English class.
You mentioned that you were a teacher. How would you have felt if somebody would have forced a certain type of literature, religious or not, on you?
Well, I mean, the schools forced literature on me all the time. I had units that I had to teach. I had to teach Greek mythology, even though I don't believe in Greek mythology. I had to teach books that I didn't particularly like because the elected representatives, at least where I'm from, on our school board said, well, here's what the curriculum is. Also, I just think it's worth noting, as we're talking about, well, why don't we teach, religious texts X, Y, or Z when we're choosing the Bible? I think of it as we teach American history, we teach the Civil War, but we don't teach Ghanaian history because it's not as foundational to the society that we currently live in.
Diane, I'd like to give you an opportunity to respond to that. Should biblical texts have a different standing when it comes to, the educational value in the U.S.?
I agree with Daniel about it's important to know the story of Adam and Eve. It's important to know Jonah and the whale. I think that all of these allusions are important, but I look to the motivation of the people who impose this requirement, and they are of one religious group, and they don't care that of the 5.5 million children in public school in Texas, probably a very large number of them, maybe half of them, are Hispanic and are Catholic, and they will be reading from the Protestant Bible. And it just seems to me this is compelling indoctrination. And Texas does this all the time. They do have a very evangelical bent to their laws, and I think it's wrong. It's opposing one particular Protestant religion, which will be offensive to people who don't share that religion.
Diane, do you see this as part of a broader trend, maybe even beyond Texas on a national level?
Oh, yeah, most certainly. We have seen in these past several years a rise of Christian nationalism, in which people are saying explicitly that the foundation of our country is Protestant Christianity, and that we have to return to our roots. And that's why I mentioned at the beginning, the word God does not appear in our Constitution. So many of the people who wrote the founding documents were deists who did not have a particular religion and who were skeptical of religion. So I think we should go back to the founding principles and leave people alone, let them practice, let them have freedom of religion and be free of the indoctrination that groups like the Texas Board of Education would like to impose on them. And again, this is not just Texas, this is evangelical Christians across the country who during the Trump administration have seen an opportunity to seize power, and they have used it to ban abortion and to impose other policies that offend them, but that other people don't agree with.
This reading list has also drawn criticism for focusing heavily on older works, many written by white male authors, in a state where more than half of students are Hispanic or Black. Daniel, how do you respond to concerns that this curriculum doesn't reflect the diversity of Texas classrooms today?
Well, I'll just address the fact that I used to teach English as a second language. My students came from Mexico, they came from Honduras, they came from Somalia, they came from Ethiopia. And my job was to introduce these students to the culture to which they were coming. It would not do them any favors to not teach them English, to keep from them, again, the books, the myths, the stories, the facts, the history of America that they're going to need
But
to know.
sorry
In fact,
to jump in
I
there.
remember one time
That is anecdotal evidence, right? I know you're speaking of your own experience, but that's not what the task of the general public education system in the U.S. is.
The task of the public education system in the US is to transmit the best that has been thought and said of our civilization onto the next generation. And part of that is when we have immigrants coming in, making sure they can speak the language, they can understand the allusions, they understand the culture. And part of that is going to be reading with them Shakespeare, Hemingway, and yes, biblical stories. I would have done my students a disfavor if I kept that curriculum and that information in those great works of literature from them. In the name of good intentions, I would have actually done them harm if I had not given them this curriculum of the West.
All right. Diane, do you see a broader failure to adapt what students are reading to the realities of modern day America?
Students see themselves represented in the curriculum. We've been through this for many decades where students, Black students, Hispanic students have said, where's my story? So I think that we have to teach American literature and also American history with an awareness of the diversity of the American people. That is one of our, I would say, our great strengths. I have no objection to reading the Bible, but again, it's a question of which Bible. If it's going to be the Protestant evangelical Bible, I think that's an imposition. Should we teach students foundational stories? Sure, why not? We should also let students see themselves reflected in the curriculum.
Daniel, quickly, a final question to you. Do you expect this matter to end up before the Supreme Court?
I'm not sure, but I think this is a fight that we ultimately have to have. Curriculum wars, I welcome them. What do we teach the next generation has been a controversial argument since Plato's Republic. So these fights don't really concern me. I don't think it's a reflective of some broader societal breakdown or rising tensions, right? What do we want to teach the next generation? What do we want to hand along to our children in kind of this collective institution that we call public education? That's going to be controversial, and I welcome the fight. And I might realize that I lose it, but I think it's good that we're having this debate and this discussion and this argument.
Daniel Buck and Diane Ravitch, thank you so much for having this discussion on air with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.